Okay, let's get started. I'm Swartz WA6HHQ. I'm half of the co-founding team of Elecraft. Wayne Burdick, N6KR, and I started the company back, I think officially we were incorporated in 1999, though started working on the K2, our first radio, somewhat before that, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. Can you hear me okay in back? I don't want to be too loud, but is this okay? You can understand? By the way, if I get going too fast, that's because I've had about 4 or 5 losing track cups of coffee this morning. I flew in from California yesterday, so I'm fighting jet lag with adrenaline and caffeine, I think, for the next day or two. And then I turn around and go back on Sunday, so I'm going to get home and have the reverse happen very quickly. But while I'm talking here, please feel free to raise your hand, stop me, ask questions. If you want to be interactive, that's great. And if I get going too fast or you can't hear what I'm saying, just slow me down so I can get excited and talk like a top 40 disc jockey like this, even know what I'm going to say. But I'll try to slow the pace down just a little bit. In any case, let me get back where they can see me on camera here too. What I'd like to talk about today is, I'm doing 2 different talks. Today we're talking more a little bit about why you want to start a ham radio company and how do you make it successful. A little bit about the history of how we started Elecraft, sort of our philosophy, how we actually brought the products out, a little bit of pictures and stuff where we went. So you can sort of see how we go about making this company successful. Tomorrow I'll be talking more about the KX3, both in terms of what it is, but also some of the inside things we did to actually give you a high performance radio. So that's more inside the KX3 tomorrow, a little more technical. And today is a little more about the company in general in terms of how we started a company in Silicon Valley to build ham radio. As it says here, how we re-energized our interest in ham radio and started a successful company along the way. That wasn't my mistake, it was by design actually. So I'll give you a little feel for that today. And can you still hear me okay in back? Is this one? Okay. So who are we? First of all, before I get started, how many folks here actually have Elecraft products? We have a few, quite a few, that's good. So you probably know who Eric and Wayne are, but I'll give you a little bit of a background on it. Both of us were licensed back when we were 14 years old in 1971. Interesting, we did not know each other. Wayne was in Southern California. We were both born out there. He was WN6HQH, novice license at that time, and I was WN6HHQ. So somebody knew we were going to start a company together years later, but they call that California karma, I guess, when we do that. But Wayne eventually changed his call. I guess he was, as a CW operator, he was smart, got rid of a lot of those H's in his call. I'm a little crazy. I have 12 dicks in a row on CW for HHQ, or 6HHQ. So these days I get 10 dB of recognition factor in the pileups because people know who I am. So that counteracts it a little bit. Wayne he's been designing radios pretty much his whole life. Even when he was a kid, he wanted to design his own work. We both taught ourselves electrical engineering before we got our degrees through ham radio. Wayne took the path. He got a degree in cognitive science from the University of California, and then actually always worked as a design engineer in both firmware and hardware design in Silicon Valley and other places. Even with a stint for the Coast Guard for a couple of years, he graduated top of his class with them and was able to get billeted to wherever he wanted to. He ended up in Bermuda taking care of the Lorian systems out there. His one claim to fame is he reprogrammed all their Hewlett-Packard calculators in the lab to start cricketing like crickets, making that noise late at night. People went crazy. So then they signed him up to do maintenance on the stuff there. My background is I'm an electrical engineer, hardware and software design. I came out of college after getting my Bachelor of Science as a design engineer in Silicon Valley and designed instrumentation systems, circuit emulation systems, and started managing larger groups, getting involved in some startup companies. Mountain Computer was a turnaround actually in California in the computer industry back in the late or early 1980s. I joined them when I was the only engineer. They had already fired their first team of engineers, and I had to hire a new team. We grew that company quite large and sold it actually to Nakamichi in the late 80s. And then I've been doing my own companies ever since. Verisys was a company I started that actually made protocol analyzers for the SCSI bus, computer bus. We did very well with that, and I sold it. And then I went and started a crazy ham radio company, and somehow that's worked out. But my background in design engineering and business management certainly came into play here as we started this company, and it's helped out quite a bit. So Wayne's early designs. Anybody built any of these? NorCal 40, Sierras, SSTs, these the NorCal QRP Club designed these. This actually comes into play of how we met each other. One key thing I want to point out about these are all done as club projects, so they're sold by a small company called Wilderness Radio, a friend of ours in the States. You notice all of these, how many folks have built Heath kits? Remember the old Heath kit system? Remember wiring harnesses? Okay, well, there's no wiring harnesses in any of these radios. They all plug together. This actually flows through our philosophy on the K1, K2, K3, KX3, and so on, to make it more reliable for you as you build the radio. But anyway, Wayne did these guys initially. The reason the history is important there is that's actually how we ended up meeting each other. I was running Verisys at the time, and that had grown fairly large. I wasn't doing much ham radio, and I wanted to get back into it. And I'd done all the other ham radio stuff, everything from HFDX, high power, you name it. And I came across a little ham club ham meeting in Monterey, California. It had maybe 500 people at it. The NorCal 40, which was the first radio in that picture I showed you. Little 40 RP rig, and that he had designed. I didn't know Wayne had done it at the time the club was selling it. And I picked up one of those and built it with a friend of mine. We were competing for DX, and I was shocked that I ended up working 108 countries that first year at 5 watts on 40 meters, so I was sort of hooked for a while. I'm not a confirmed QRPer, but it was just another thing to do. I started showing up at the NorCal QRP meetings because that was people that were doing design work and actually were interested in modifying stuff, which is another way to get back into it. And Wayne and I met there back in 1994. 95 and 96, we operated Field Day together and started kicking around ideas where our ultimate Field Day radio would be, not thinking we're going to start a company out of this, but that's sort of how it got there. In 1997, we actually decided to start designing a radio with K2. And Wayne lives 60 miles north of me, by the way. He's up on the San Francisco Peninsula. I'm down on Monterey Bay in Aptos, where the company is now. We had all this long distance between us. On the phone late at night, headsets on, blowing things up, smoke coming off the bench, and describing to each other what we were seeing, which was sort of interesting. And then we introduced the K2 design concept at Pacificon, West Coast Convention, ARRL convention, very similar in size to this one. In 1997, we just showed a foam box mock-up with little plug-in cards, and it's actually the same size as the K2, the first radio. And we're about this size, maybe about twice the number of people. We're just two guys that they thought were crazy and were coming up with some other ham radio project that Mike built too and never really do anything else with. But they got a great response from that and actually gave us confidence to go on to the next step and actually bring this out as a product, though. Certainly was scary along the way. This was the original K2 concept. How many people build K2s in here? So you'll recognize this is not what you built. This is pretty close in size, but we did one thing in this concept. There are two things. There were vertical plug-in cards, which we did not use in the K2. Notice the battery was mounted here on the PC board. Not a good thing if you drop the radio. It tends to snap the PC board in half. We recognized that before we built any prototypes. So, am I okay for your camera, by the way? Can you still see? Good. So this was more of a concept. This is what we showed at that first meeting, getting things going. Getting some interference on this a little bit. We'll see how we do it. This was the first prototype in 1998. Again, notice no wiring harness, and so this is, for those of you who built it, this is an original control board. New ones, we had to get more rooms so they're wider, to add a little more stuff on them. But the basic concept, this was the first working unit that we ever did. And we showed this at one of these NorCal QRP groups, and they picked it apart and looked at it. And I think we actually got about 10 guys to sign up to buy one at that first meeting, so that was a small deal back in 1998. By the way, I went full-time on this in July of 1998. And Wayne, I talked into leaving his existing job in January of 99, right before we shipped our first products. And so that was a big jump for him, because he hadn't done a startup before. This was shady Silicon Valley guys in 1998 meeting in a parking lot. No, it's not a drug deal. So it looks like we were guilty looking here. A lot younger, 14 years younger. But these were the first circuit boards for the K2 transceiver. And this is the Good Earth is a restaurant in Silicon Valley, actually right next to where Apple Computer is headquartered. So it's a lot of entrepreneurs and high-tech guys hang out there and stuff. So we're sitting around, they didn't even blink at us. There's a couple guys sitting at a table. All we had was electronic parts and circuit boards on the table and some coffee. And so they're sort of used to that there. It's a little different culture, but we had a little fun with that. 1998 also, we had the first two K2s here, Field Day. And this actually, we sort of realized we had something going. I had started working on our first prototype several months earlier and recognized recognized that we could push more performance out of it by getting the phase noise down, pumping up the front end to get better dynamic range and balancing the system out. We noticed that a lot of radios had not been following what I consider basic receiver design technique for quite some time. So we decided to see how, in terms of getting dynamic range out of the radio, so we decided to go back to basics. And that's really nothing magic, it's just following the rules for radio design. And we actually were able to get very good performance out of the K2. I didn't quite believe my lab numbers. We hadn't been tested by the ARRL lab yet. On field day, we took this up to a local field day site, and there was another ham radio group, maybe less than a kilometer away from us, looking right at us and beaming their signals. And they were high-power guys. We were running low power at the time. And we could scoot right up next to them, about a kilohertz or less away on CW, and operate. We barely even knew they were there, but they were hearing us because their radios were overloading. We were only running 5 watts. So they eventually had to come over and see who these two guys were that were able to do this and what kind of radios we were using. And actually, this is a picture they took of us. We were there. We actually had taken the radios apart to show them that, like inside, and that you could align it actually in the field. We actually misaligned them and realigned them for people in the field. So that was the first clue that we actually had something that worked pretty well back in 1998. This actually is a demo for the Northern California QRP guys. They used to meet at the California Burger, if you can see another kind of California, great meeting spot in California. Anybody, I don't know, any QRPers in the room here at all? Anybody? Do you know Chuck Adams, K5FO, CW operator? That's Chuck in the red back there. He's actually a real rocket scientist, PhD in physics. And we have a lot of other guys. Dave Fifield on the right, who's designed a lot of British, done a lot of QRP rigs, Red Hot 40 and some other radios like that. And quite a few other folks. And that's the original unpainted K2 in the picture here. The reason I'm moving around for the camera is so the other guys can see, but I don't block your view too much. And here's the fun part. We did the first 100 K2s, literally in the basement of my house. That's my tower in the background. My wife thought I was crazy. I had one technician working for me. We had cups out on the table. We're putting resistors and kit you build yourself. Which actually was a good philosophy, by the way, for a startup business. We had much less overhead. We didn't have to have a test department or a final quality control step beyond checking what was inside the bags of the parts for building a full kit where you soldered it all together. So we had to make sure we had all the parts in there, but I didn't have to test the assembled product, which was a big deal from a startup standpoint. So we even designed it so that we could put the original small white box the K2 came in inside of these United States Postal Service priority mailboxes, which they gave us for free. They sort of looked at me funny when I showed up and asked for a couple hundred of these the first time, but they gave them to me. And then we showed up and delivered the radios, and I rolled into the post office with 25 on a hand cart, and they were, wow, this is great. So hold on, I go get some more, and I came back. I brought 100 of them in that first time, and we shipped them out to our first 100 field testers. And I said, we'll be back. I had no clue how many we were going to come back with. Well, those people were rather disappointed when we had to relocate to larger quarters and change post offices, because we actually become a major part of their business after we were shipping for a while. But these were the first ones going out the door as we loaded up the truck back then. And then it was January 22nd, 1999. So, startup ingredients. What's important from a startup in any business, but if you're doing ham radio, you have to doubly pay attention to this, because a lot of us make mistakes when we start a business in our hobby. First of all, it's sort of obvious. You have to prepare to work hard, and this is certainly true. Sleep. Well, of course, ham radio operators stay up late at night, so we know how not to sleep, so we already had that down. But you definitely lose a lot of sleep along the way. Key thing, though, is it's not a hobby sideline. It's a business. And over again, I've had friends that have started, making a little gadget add-on for ham radio, a little watt meter or something. And they said, I can sell it for this amount because it's just myself in my garage. I don't need any other overhead issues. Well, that's fine until you try to sell a lot of them. You realize you don't have enough profit to hire that first person to ship stuff for you or to buy parts or so on. And so you have to really design from business up front and do a lot of planning. And that's where I came into play, and I sat down and said, what's it really going to cost us to run this business over the next 2 or 3 years, where we can survive, A, the product can survive in terms of profitability, and B, generate cash flow up front, so we didn't have to bring in major investment from outside. We actually started Elecraft with money out of our own pockets. We put a chunk of cash in at Pete's, and actually by the end of the first year we were able to take all that back out and pay ourselves back in 1999. So it worked out pretty well from the first start, but we had to pay attention to this stuff. Key thing is plan to be profitable from the start. If you remember the dot-com boom, how many companies were going public before they were profitable? I couldn't figure that one out at all. It didn't make any sense to me. We were doing this right in the middle of it. It was 1999, 2000 was right when all that was going on. Our biggest problem is our suppliers sure you're actually making money on your product from the start. Because your customers want you to stay around. They don't want you to go out of business next year. Now, yes, they're going to get it for cheap that first year, but if you're not there the second year, they're not going to be very happy if we're not there to enhance it or fix it or whatever. So we designed that, even built in the cost of support. You know, we have real strong support. You guys pay for it, of course, from the product when you buy it from us. That's how we fund and pay those salaries. So we designed that from the start. Cash flow. Those of you that run businesses understand how important cash flow is, which is different than profit. You can be profitable and be out of business and be bankrupt at the same time. Because if your customers aren't paying you on time, how do you pay your employees? And even though you've got, quote, profits from the sales, until that cash is in the bank, it's not real. So one of the things that we did is actually structured the business using outside manufacturers. Once we, even as the K2 got bigger, I actually had an outside company kitting the parts for us in the bags. These are the guys that make our circuit boards now. I actually talked them into, which is not something they did. It's got too big for us to do in-house. I got a local contract manufacturer to hire another person that's specialized in just putting the parts in the bags for us. And this guy, of course, has our circuit board business now, so he's very happy that he actually did that for us back then. But we were able to leverage all that outside. What's nice about that is that we also did direct sales, this is another part of it, to people like yourself on the internet, and you sent us the order. We charged you when we shipped the product. The parts came into us in these kits. We paid net 30 to the supplier. So half the time I had the money from you before I had to pay the supplier. So that's actually important if you think about it, because you want to keep that cash flow where you're just at that or just ahead of it so you don't go negative as you grow. That's always a challenge. In this kind of business it works. Some businesses we have big capital investments. Of course you have to bring in outside money, but we didn't have to do that in this case. And to this day we have no outside investors, no bank loans or debt at all. We own everything in the company. All the inventory is owned by the company. So it's a nice, stable business. And even through the recession, we were able to hire people, take risks, start new designs, and then generate profits off of those because we had the money already saved up to do that. That's the other piece, is don't take it all out right away, too. You say, I'm selling this stuff, I'm rich now. Boy, yeah, great. You pull it all out of the company, and all of a sudden you're out of cash in the company. A lot of people do that, and you don't want to take that money out too quickly. More important, though, is getting good employees. How many folks have dealt with Lisa or Gary or any of the people inside the company here? Those guys have been with us a long time. Gary's our first tech support engineer. He was actually a customer that was helping people together on our email list, which now has about 6,000 subscribers. And he was doing it for free. And once it got too big for me to do on the phone in between purchasing parts and getting things in bags and stuff, Wayne and I started looking around for help in that area. And we said, hey, this guy looks good. He's in Arizona. We flew him up to California, met with him, perfect match. Sent him back to Arizona, set him up with equipment down there, gear, lab, everything. And to this day, Gary handles about 60 to 70% of our email traffic for customer support. He's great. And he actually did all my repairs for a long time on the K2s and stuff. So finding good people like that, or Lisa, who's been with me also about 12, 13 years. Both Gary and Lisa were about the same time. Getting good people that stay with you a long time. Lisa's our business manager inside the company. So this never stops. I mean, half my job now is getting good people and keeping them in there and keeping them happy. We have a virtual organization also, our engineering team. We have engineering people at the headquarters. Of course, I mentioned Wayne's up in Belmont, just north, about 60 miles from me. Lyle Johnson, our DSP expert, actually just moved from Washington State down to Tucson, Arizona. We've got engineers in Los Angeles, Silicon Valley, Oregon, Washington. What's nice is with the internet, we can all be like we're in the same room. We can be talking in the conference room on a conference call. We can have a computer screen up looking at the same things. The whole virtual network feels like they're in the same room. The best part for me as a business owner, I don't have to pay for the overhead of their office. I mean, I pay for their basic expenses, but in terms of physical overhead, it's a lot less. And it allows me to hire good people where they live. If you can find people that can work from their own location, that's not always a given. But if you can find good people like that, it's valuable. And we keep them happy. The next thing is important. Turn your customers into product evangelists. How many Elecraft evangelists, product evangelists do we have in the room? Do you have you guys that tell your friends about it? That's wonderful. That's what makes us survive in business. I think it's true for any business. If you take care of your customers, you're going to take care of us also. So we do that to an extreme, and that permeates the whole company culture. It doesn't matter who you are in the company, that's the message you get. In one essence, I tell everybody in the company you're in sales. It doesn't matter if you're in the manufacturing department, engineering department, you want to sell that product and make that customer happy. So that's very important all the way through. But in this case, something we did, and initially it was almost serendipitous this by mistake, we decided how are we going to get enough cash in for that first product. And we said, how about if we sign up 100 people to field test it? We don't charge them until we ship, but at least we know they were going to buy the product. That was the initial motivation. And then they helped us test the product, get it working. We guaranteed that if we found any problems, we would replace boards or whatever we had to do to make the product work. But what we didn't realize we were going to get is we were going to get 100 free salespeople that were going to tell their friends about that K2 that they had designed. This is the first radio. And that was a huge, huge advantage for us. Can you hear me back over the PA system? Okay, great. Matter of fact, here's a bunch of them. This is Fort Tuckhill, Arizona, a little Hamfest in 1999, I think, in the summer. And you can tell it was pretty warm there. Arizona tends to get, this is the high country of Arizona, but it was still warm. So it's Wayne and myself in the middle. And this is the first time we'd never seen this many built K2s in one place in our lives, so that was quite a shock. And we didn't know these guys were all going to show up. They all showed up with the radios on their own. And by the way, one other side effect, how many people in their room know what the serial number is of their Elecraft radio? Have you ever heard of any other radio where people know the serial number of their radio? I didn't get that at first. It was people would walk up to us at trade shows and say, hi, I'm so-and-so, W6XYZ, K2 serial number 599. And the next guy said, okay. The next guy would hear his serial number 623. I go, where are these guys coming from? And it was a badge of honor. I think when you built the radio, especially in the early days, that was it. But it's continued on. And so that was another interesting side effect. But in all this case, we sort of deputized our customers. And this, having 100 people that built the radio, knew the radio, tell their friends, that just multiplied out geometrically in terms of getting word out about the radio for us. So the K2 is what it looked like when it was finished up. Again, this was the sort of Heathkit solder everything together radio. But then we also, one thing I didn't mention is we also designed this incrementally because we knew we weren't going to have a lot of cash up front to design every single option out the door at first. So we announced it that way. So the first radio was a 10-watt CW only 80 through 10 meter transceiver, which worked great. Then we added a sideband adapter with built-in filter. Then we added noise blanker, 160 meter option, auto tuner, and on. And actually, that's the 100-watt option. We actually designed it as a 100-watt radio from the beginning because I actually was pretty accurate on this. I told Wayne I figured there was somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000 core QRP operators that would buy a product in terms of in our category, and that it would flatten off after that in terms of sales. You wouldn't keep seeing it going up on one product forever if it was just QRP. And that was about it on that first product. We've sold many more of that over the years, but in terms of slowdown of rate, while we were still a 10-watt radio, was about that range. As soon as we added the 100-watt option to it, it took off and did very well because it covered that group also. So we got both the QRP guys and the 10-watt to 100-watt guys. What's interesting thing is that we still had to fit that 100-watt design into the existing case, which was not easy. Wayne has an interesting design philosophy. One I've never 100% agreed with, but actually it's gotten us great products because we go back and forth on how we're going to do this. We end up picking the size for the product first and then fitting it all inside. And those of you that built our products, you keep looking at it and saying, what else are they going to fit inside this thing? We always manage to find some nook or cranny to do that with, but it actually works out pretty well. It ends up being a nice compact system when you're done, which is a good thing. So we're up to year 2000 at this point with the K2 100-watt version, which became also, for those of you that followed the expeditions, a favorite for the expeditions. The Voodoo expeditioners going over into Africa use them all over the place. It was small, high performance, and they loved it. So they're still very popular for that. We followed that with the K1, and this was a portable radio. It actually would run off receive on a 9-volt battery. At day we had to do that for a whole day. You could not transmit on a 9-volt battery though. That would die after about 5 minutes, but made a good demo. It was a low current design. Initially, first attempt at a trail-friendly radio in terms of being able to use it out on the road. Very small. Any KX1 owners in the room here? This was the first real trail-friendly radio. Notice it faces up rather than front like most radios. So you have it sit in your lap if you're backpacking or at a picnic table. And so it wasn't staring at your belly button. It was actually looking up at you in terms of operating. This one was CW only, and you'll recognize when you get to the KX3, which is a big popular radio now, similarities in terms of that approach with built-in paddle option and so on. This was CW only. Later radios, obviously, we added all mode, which made a big difference. But here we are up to 2004. So we went through a sequence of K2, which was still the core radio, experimented with radios. Not every one is as big a seller as the K2. You'd never expect every one to be as big a success. We were lucky, all of them were profitable. You go through, you have a couple that all sort of maintaining your growth as a company at a steady rate, every once in a while you hit a home run. You just have to be ready for that when you hit that home run. You always think they're going to be home runs, but you get singles, doubles, triples, to use a baseball analogy. But every once in a while you get that home run, so you have to have everything in place when that one takes off. We sort of have a clue usually when we go into field tests by the reactions we get, which ones are going to be big. We actually sold a lot of KX1s. That was a big little product. But here's the big one. In 2007, we did the K3. I think you mentioned there's some K3 owners in here. Got a few of you guys. Our biggest problem designing the K3 is we were sort of victims of our own success. We had surprised everybody with the K2. We got the top receiver specification from the ARRL tests at the time for the K2's dynamic range performance. So we came out with the K3, we were going to say, how are we going to beat that? I mean, it's not easy. I mean, we were trying to push the performance even further. And what could we do to do that each time we've done this? And so we had to have something that had quieter phase noise than the K2, quieter transmit noise. We had to have better dynamic range, so that involved going through the whole receive chain and optimizing it one more time. We actually, in the case of the K3, from a design standpoint, we, for instance, decided to use INRAD, which makes crystal filters, as add-on filters for Yaesu, Icom, Kenwood's other radios in the aftermarket. And it turns out actually a good friend of mine, Trey, N5KO, who is an Aptos, was thinking about buying INRAD from George, the prior owner. At the time, we were talking about the K3 internally. And Trey didn't know we were doing the K3. We kept that secret from everybody. But he was telling me about this interest in his company. He says, you might want to talk to us fairly soon here. I might be buying some crystal filters from you. But here's the problem. We actually improved the receiver chain even more so. We had some better components to work with, too, than we had when we did the K2. But we ran into a problem, which was the crystal filters, and for those of you that have followed high dynamic range radios, became the limiting factor for performance in the radio. We had to actually, we didn't realize this at first, but we tested on one day and get one dynamic range number, come back the next day, run the exact same radio and get 5 dB difference. I thought we had something wrong in our design, something's oscillating, something's doing something strange. We finally traced it down to the crystal filters, and what was happening is literally, if you ran enough signal into the crystal filter, you'd shake all the manufacturing debris off the filter, think like ultrasonic cleaning, and that would actually make it work a little better. But we were also pushing the crystal filters to their mechanical limits. It's like when you take a resonant anything, bell, and you run it high enough signal into it, it's going to distort at some point. Below that, it's a great filter. Above that, it starts adding its own intermodulation distortion. Crystal filters are no different. The way they cut the crystal and how they manufacture it, though, has a wide variability, even in the ones that are being made commercially that we were receiving. So we ended up having a special test fixture that we designed with a close two-tone test at high power into the crystal filters. We do that after we actually ran a high signal through them, like at plus 10 dBm for 20 seconds or 30 seconds to stabilize them. That actually broke them in at the first level. But then you get the standard filters over, and part of the reason why we hooked up with INRAD, we chose an 8.215 IF, which is the same as Yaesu is using in their 1000 MP, and those things. They figured there'd be a lot of good crystal filters in that category. But what we found is about 20% of the crystal filters that we tested with this test fixture from INRAD we couldn't use, because we're supporting a higher dynamic range than the other radios were pushing it to. They just were not getting that strong of a signal. They would distort somewhere else in their receive chain before it even got to us. So we actually got them to sort out their stuff designed to our spec, and subsequently their manufacturer actually makes them better and better, but still to this day they sort all their incoming filters, and we get all the ones that meet our specs, and the other ones go into the Yaesu radios. But that's not saying anything bad about Yaesu. They're not bad filters. It's just that the radio there, because it was a little bit lower dynamic range, actually distorted before it got to the point where it pushed the filter to its limit. In our case, we had the front end so much cleaner, then the crystal filter was the limiting factor. So that's always been a challenge. Obviously, the next generation will be even tougher for us. So our big challenge with the K3, that's just one example of design problems. Believe me, there are a lot of other ones. But we had to go through to get it to be a successful product out the door. So our biggest worry was obviously introducing something and have it not perform as well as the K3. We didn't want to just have more bells and whistles on it. We wanted it to be a better performing radio. A couple of things we had to do. We had to design a better phase lock loop. We actually band switch the phase lock loop design, so the range of the voltage controlled oscillator is much narrower per band, so you introduce less electrical noise and phase noise as a result. And that was a big breakthrough. It actually, to this day, is probably one of my more touchy manufacturing processes. We have to hand tune each one of those going out the door to make sure they're centered inside their range. But that that bought us a lot from a quieter standpoint. We have great dynamic range. If you have a dirty oscillator, it doesn't buy you anything because you get noise reciprocally mixing the stuff off frequency back into your filter, which is not a great idea. So these are just a couple of the fun things. We had this sort of the curse of being successful with your first big radio performance-wise is it set that mark pretty high that we had to beat that. Fortunately, we did with the K3. It came out, topped the charts again, and beat the K3, especially the K2, especially for close in-phase noise, and helped out quite a bit. So it actually set a new mark for receiver performance. And what's really interesting is the K3 actually, I think, changed the industry a little bit. We saw some radios now, finally, I think about 3 years after the K3 out, starting to come in with the same architecture from overseas that we're using in the K3. So they recognized that it actually did make a big difference in how the radio operates. So what was new on the K3? Just real quick, you're asking what else we had to design new, and this is a challenge when you're beginning at the company. Is you had to build the engineering up a little more. We had hired a DSP expert, Lyle Johnson, who had designed a add-on DSP for the K2 originally as an outside business, and then when he got it done, we did it cooperatively with him. I said, that's so good, we've got to hire you. I made him an offer he couldn't refuse, and we brought that in as an Elecraft product. And to this day, he does all of our DSP design. He did the K3 also. So we had to do a better mixer. We got a switching mixer in the front end of the K3, low noise, phase lock loop oscillator, I mentioned already. The riffing filter problem I just mentioned, and that one of the key things there, again, the K2 and the K3 is because we have a single first IF at a low frequency. We're not going up to 45 megahertz or 70 megahertz. We can get a very narrow, high-performance filter at that first IF, which means you're not using a wide riffing filter, letting through signals to trash your next mixer stage before you get to your narrow filters. We go to them right away. We had to design better bandpass filters in front of them to get rid of the image issues. So it makes a tougher job from a bandpass filter standpoint, just more stages. But we did that. We decided to do that to get the performance. We built an IF shift and passband tuning. The K2 didn't have that. I did that in the DSP. We built an identical second receiver. This is actually a philosophy I'd had for a lot of years. I was disappointed with sub-receivers that, yes, they listen to your transmit frequency for a pileup, they're fine. But they were usually a lower dynamic range even than their main receiver in any radio you could get. In the K3, it's identical. We actually have a complete duplicate of the receiver chain, second phase lock loop. They're locked together. By the way, you can actually have the two receivers locked together for diversity reception off a single VFO. There's a dead spot right there. I don't want to step into that. Off a single VFO, so you can even have two antennas. And if the signal fades out on one, you pick it up on the other if you have them oriented differently at different altitudes. It could just be two wire antennas. I've used it on 40 meters at night or 80 meters at night. One signal fades down to the noise in one ear, and the other one it comes up above the noise. And it's an amazing effect. Being able to get those two receivers with the same architecture allowed us to do that. We obviously built in things these are more performance, not performance, but operating features, parametric equalizers, transmit and receive, so you can make your microphone sound wherever you want, or compensate for older ears. In my case, or any of us that listened to too much rock and roll in our early years, it takes care of that high frequency loss. We built, and this was sort of fun, PSK, RTTY, and CW decode initially. And actually, the thing here was sort of fun is that I said to Wayne afterwards, if we can decode this, and we didn't have any keyboard on it at the time, I said, why don't we make it just for fun? And I was joking, I wasn't actually even serious. Why don't we make it so we can decode our own CW paddle when you're sending, then convert that to ASCII or Bato and send it as RTTY and PSK. And I thought I was joking. He had it working the next morning. And to this day, it's one of those fun features. Actually, I know a lot of CW operators did their first RTTY contest on the K3. I wouldn't recommend doing it for a long contest. You really confuse the other guys when you start sending pro signs, but yes.
Can you set a keyboard into it?
I'm sorry?
Can you actually sort of just have a keyboard on there?
Yeah, can I have a keyboard on it? If you have the P3 pen adapter, we have an SVGA card for it to put it on a big screen. When we added that card, we actually added, he was asking if we could put a keyboard on the K3 now. That VGA card for the pen adapter adds a keyboard, USB keyboard input. I actually use a wireless PC keyboard for like a date when I demo it. It'll send, and it has memories and everything, so you can have RAG files and everything. That lets you do direct keyboard, CW, RTTY, and PSK. We're not going to give you quite the fancy display of some of the software programs for PSK, but it's still quite usable. And I use it quite a bit. Going back down the list here real quick, we had a general coverage receiver, which we didn't have in the K2 because we optimized the receiver first for the ham bands. We have a little plug-in board that has additional front-end bandpass filters to cover outside the ham bands. One key thing with the K3, we made it 100% remote controllable, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but basically that allows us to have one K3 control another mirror all the controls and displays halfway across the world. You can't tell that I'm operating a remote radio, which is sort of neat. It's not a computer screen you're looking at like how most of us have done remote control up until now. This actually is one radio controlling another. We actually have a control head version of the K3 that doesn't make you pay for all the RF sections. You can use that locally if you can't put up antennas. Have your K3 at your friend's house, vacation house, on top of a mountain somewhere. It's actually a company in the US that's doing timeshare of major contesting sites or DX sites that you can rent time on that, and they'll supply the K3 zeros, which are our control head version. And they're actually made a business out of it. I'm surprised, but they're actually doing that. So guys that always wanted to operate that stacked 40-meter Yagi system can do that now. Fun stuff. But actually, if you're retiring into a condominium where you can't put up antennas, this is a practical way to operate still, which is nice. What else? Oh, and it covers the last thing we made, transverter design. This is a big IF radio for people too, so we can actually display up to 9 transverter bands with the correct frequency, which is nice. So the combination of performance and usable features, we actually had to put all this in the K3 to make it fly. It took a lot of work, but we made it go. We also designed this as a product line, so once you buy one, you can't just stop, right? You have to get the rest. That's what keeps us in business. We're honest about that. So K3, P3 pan adapter, which basically, by the way, is a direct sampling receiver. It's a direct digital down converting DSP-based receiver that goes up to 21 megahertz, really picking the IF off the K3 at 8.215, but we have people putting these on FT5000s on their IF. We have basically anybody that'll act as a dumb pan adapter for almost any radio out there that puts the IF out of the radio. So it's been sold for more than just K3s. And then here's another example of fitting it in a box that's the same size. I decided, this is my decision, I said, our 500 watt amplifier has to be exactly the same size as the K3. And Wayne sort of looked at me this time and said, are you crazy? And we fit it in there actually, it worked out very well. So that's the K line. Then we have an auto tuner, it's about 1 inch high called the Cat 500. It sits on top of that amplifier too. And it gives you an L network, switch auto tuner remembers where you were tuned, and it matches up about a 10 to 1 SWR, which is not a bad accomplishment on something like that. So it works very well. There's the pan app. This is the option for those of us that need reading glasses. This is the SVGA option. It gives you a big display. You don't have to pick a big monitor like this. I have a medium-sized small one, which works out real well. That's the one that little card that plugs in for that gives you the additional keyboard input too. One key thing here is we do both spectral display and waterfall, showing you the history of what's been happening. That's really important when you're watching a band at DX station. It's just barely above the noise. You can see there's something went over there. You can tune over, pick it off, and away you go. KPA 500, I've got an inside picture in a second so you can see how we fit everything inside the box. Like, this is all premeditated. We did the K3, we actually had a roadmap to develop all these products and sort of surprise you and bring them out, which worked out pretty well. This is an FET design with a very fast diode switch TR network, so it's full break-in. It's faster than the radios. In other words, this is not your limiting factor for CW operators or digital modes or anything. The radio switching time for your phase lock loops is usually a limiting factor. This is much faster than the radios, so it switches real fast. We built auto band select. There's a frequency counter in there, so if you hook up PTT and RF to the amp, it'll follow you anywhere. If you've got band data, like the K3 has, we'll do it ahead of time, but that first few milliseconds, we transmit the amp seamlessly, kicks over to whatever frequency you're on. And we actually have a linear supply inside. People ask why we didn't do a switcher. I think I was talking to one of you in the room here earlier today about that. We designed a switcher for some of our early prototypes. When you're inside the box, keeping electrical switcher noise out of your receive path is almost impossible. If I had it as a separate supply on the floor, which was not our goal here, I might be able to get away with it. I mean, in the box we had to add so much brute force filtering and shielding. My weight advantage I thought I was going to get from the switcher, and also a higher power switcher has bigger components in it too. It almost negated the weight advantage. I finally looked at it and I said, why are we doing this? It's costing more. It's going to be unrepairable by most customers unless you send it back to us if it has a problem. And it's got noise. I mean, you can take it was at a usable level. You put the antenna on, you wouldn't hear it in most cases. But most guys take the antenna off and tune 160. If they hear any noise at all, it's a bad thing, right? So it wouldn't have solved it, this is my opinion. So we did a linear supply. Simplicity itself, it's very easy for anybody to understand and repair if they need to, and it's quiet. I had zero problems with it. We use a toroidal transformer, and it's very efficient from that standpoint, as efficient as those get. We don't generate a ton of heat in that supply, so it works out real well. And there's a picture of it. So there's the big guy. So basically it's very simple too. RF deck on the right side is a sandwich of the PA deck, low pass filters, and heatsink. That we, even in the kit version, we've already tested that for you and burned it in at temperature, so it's gotten a big workout. And then the transformer, linear supply, and I/O back here in the back. So, and a front panel with the microprocessor that does all the thinking for us. So we actually did fit it inside. This does about, so it's about a kilowatt input, about 500 to 600 watts output. So not bad for a package the size of a K3. People look at that, and they say, where's the power supply? They always, until they pick it up. When they pick it up, they know how. It weighs about 13 kilos or 12.5, so you notice it after you do that. One key thing with the amplifier is, of course, you want to make it seamless and automatic, but you can't do that without a smart auto tuner. So next thing we did this last year or two was to bring up the same tuner we use in the K3 and all the other radios, the same networks, L networks, the same exact algorithm from software, just scaled up to high power. And this, I mentioned, will handle at a 500 watt level at 10 to 1 SWR on 80 through 10. We derated at 5 to 1, either because of strays, capacitance up at 6 meters, or high voltages down at 160. And then, actually, we don't officially tell people this, but that's equivalent to that same voltages and currents at a 3 to 1 SWR at about 1500 watts. We only spec it to 3 to 1 SWR at 1000 watts just to be safe, because you guys are very good at blowing things up. And we found that out over the years. People do all sorts of strange things to their products. So we spec it very conservatively on that. So officially it says even 3 to 1, which is better than most internal tuners on radios. So it'll cover your like 80 meter dipole on most fans if you have it resonant at one end and you want to cover the other. The amp will remember every setting across the band every 20 or 30 kilohertz on the low bands. And as you move across, it clicks immediately back to what you last tuned it to. So having that sit on top of the amp makes that a total 500-600 watt station that you don't have to even think about. It just follows you around. And I proved that because I don't like reaching over and tuning knobs like I used to have to do my manual amps. And it's a wonderful thing to do. Anybody here have a K30, the remote control system? We built, once we sell right now, the same size as a K3, the control head. But we just did a version that's just coming out in the next couple of months. It's, honey, I shrunk the K3. This is a K30 Mini. It's like the iPad Mini, I guess. We actually, this has got all the control circuitry to do remote control of a K3, which is sort of cool. This will be coming out a little bit later on. But we're already selling a lot of the K30s, but the Mini version is functionally identical. It's just shrunk down, so less deep. So what I do is I take it on vacation, or actually when I go on a road trip like this, if I want to operate my home station, you can operate from the hotel room. So it's actually sort of fun. I also bring a KX3 with me, so I'll operate locally there, and I'll talk to myself sometimes. I've actually done that. That's really fun. I was at a trade show once in a big tent in the middle of the desert in Tucson, Arizona. Don't ask me how hot it was. It was an interesting day. Little airport down there. But I had a buddy pole set up with a K3, running 100 watts, talking to a K3 back in California. You could hear the whole round trip, including the echo through the internet. It was sort of interesting we were doing that. So, fun stuff. I won't go into detail here, but that's just the sort of concept of how we do the internet stuff. So come up to the KX3, the last big product we've done here. This is going back the other direction, sort of back in some ways to our roots in terms of portable radios like the KX1, top facing, but our goal was to actually also do an SDR different than anybody had done an SDR. And again, sort of a flow of all of our products is to be a little bit different in the way we approach it, but still give you a lot of what you're used to working with here. In this case, it's an SDR with a twist because it has knobs. So the key thing here is it feels like an analog radio, even though it's a software-defined radio inside. It's proven out. This has been very successful. This is what it looks like. We do about all of our products. We do initially in concept CAD drawings at this level with a one-page description of how it works. Running around inside the company, we usually have a few inside confidence, outside confidence that we bring in to look at it and see what works, so people can figure out how to use it. So we actually critique our designs before we even do any circuit work on it. This came out. We surprised a few people. This was back in 2012. How many people are familiar with Rob Sherwood's testing site for receivers? He and the ARRL, their test labs track within about 3 dB of each other typically. Rob likes to try to sneak his reviews out first, so keeps a lot of competition, so both labs do a real good job at it. We surprised a lot of people with this little KX3 because Rob ranks his tables just on close spaced 2 kilohertz intermodulation dynamic range. Basically, intermod from close stations interfering with you. You take two signals, one 2 kilohertz, one 4 kilohertz away, and crank them up in amplitude until they generate interference on your frequency you're listening to. And the little KX3 with the little baseband ripping filters that we designed for it, we'll talk more about this technology tomorrow, allowed us to get very good dynamic range on a little portable radio. Actually 104 dB at 2 kilohertz spacing. It shocked people a little bit. And also a very quiet local oscillator too. So we did a few better things there as we got better. Though in reality, you take the top radios here, the top 4 or 5 radios, we're all within about 3 or 4 dB of each other. So these are all very good radios. So you can't say one's dramatic. If you sat one down next to you on the bench and even in a field day or contesting situation, the top 2 or 3 radios are going to all perform very close to each other. So the absolute plus minus a couple of dB numbers are not a big difference, especially if you're testing. I can in the same test lab bring the same radio in 2 weeks apart and get 1 or 2 dB difference in the numbers, because you're looking at things down to noise floor when you're comparing the strength of these signals that causes the interference. You're always referencing that to your noise floor, and that can vary a little bit by a dB or so. It's very tough to get exactly the same number every day, plus or minus a dB. So I don't worry about it. In the top 5 or 10 on the table, it's very good, especially the top 5. So having the KX3 and the K3 up there doesn't hurt. That's where they are right here. We sandwich the FT5000 in between. The other key number, by the way, to pay attention when you're looking at radios, at least in dynamic ranges, intermodulation is 1, but the other one is descents or blocking dynamic range. That's where a single signal close by or even far away overloads your first receive chain amplifiers and you lose sensitivity. So you crank up a single signal until we see the signal listening on frequency actually drop in amplitude. And you compare that to your noise floor. And we tend to beat most of the top radios by at least 8 to 10 dB, regardless of where you're at. If you look at there, the KX3 gets 138 dB of 100 kilohertz blocking dynamic range. So signals even 100 kilohertz or 10 kilohertz away, it doesn't matter in our case because we have tight riffing filters. You have to have them 138 dB above the noise floor before they cause that to happen. If you look at an FT5000, which is a very good radio, which is still not a bad number, they're 127, so they're 11 to 13 dB worse. That's a big difference if you're in a contest multi-op situation where you have strong signals in the same band. We, on the DXpeditions we send this out on, actually have people operating in the same band on CW and sideband at the same time, quite successfully. If you look a little further down the list, you see the numbers drop off pretty quick too. So that's the other number that most people should be paying attention to. So it's never a single number when you rank radios. And of course, all these radios are good. Average person operating at home, no other transmitters nearby, not a contest weekend, you're not going to notice the difference at all because all of them have good sensitivity. But obviously you want to push it for those edge conditions where we all run into it when your friend down the block gets on the air or you're in a contest or your field day, then you really notice those kind of things. As a result of this, the K3 has now become the DXpedition radio of choice too, from all the major DXpeditions that are out there. I think I have a few of them on the screen here if we get towards the end. Oh, forgot one thing. So, by the way, we mentioned that we had the K2 designed as a 100-watt radio from the start. The little KX3 we also designed as a 100-watt radio integrated system from the start. So here we wanted to be portable or at base station at home where you could unconnect it and go out portable, or mobile operation, which was a big one for me. So we designed a smart amplifier. It's like Honey, I Shrunk the KP8500. It's got a built-in frequency counter, actually the same firmware. It has an internal auto-tuner option. In this case, we have enough room to fit the auto-tuner inside. There's a sandwich here. You have the upside-down PA deck, low-pass filter, and an optional auto-tuner at 100-watt level here. And so the whole thing fits in a single box, a nice little brick. Just don't tell my wife, she might throw it at me sometimes, but it's about that size. It works out real well. Those are just coming out. So get back to startups. Key startup ingredients. One of the other things we did was use the internet for viral marketing. The first year and a half, we never had a print ad anywhere. It was just the internet, and we had more orders than we could handle in terms of what we could ship out the door. So that was a good vehicle for us. We eventually went to ads in the major magazines in the U.S. like QST, CQ, and it brings people back to our website, or they can call us up on the phone, and they can get the manuals and all that. So we used that. And then the key thing was doing tech support over the internet too, which saved us a lot of overhead. Because instead of having to deal on the phone, which takes a lot longer, you can quickly answer people, especially people kept asking the same kinds of questions because we already had answered it once, we'd given the same answer. And then we could put it up on an FAQ, frequently asked questions on the website, that answered that question. All of a sudden those calls went down or emails went down, so we could manage it more efficiently. Obviously stay focused, methodically develop your product lines. That's what I'm showing, trying to emphasize here with the product run through. walk our way through very methodically. Generally, if you see a new radio from us, you're going to see more add-ons for that as we come out. It's not just because we're throwing stuff out there because we want to sell more stuff. We actually design a whole system, but we know we can't get that all out up front, so we do it a piece at a time. We have fun. We enjoy this. We're still doing this after 14 years, and believe it or not, I'm still smiling. My wife still talks to me. My business partner, which is the more amazing thing, still talks to me. Having a business partner, for those of you who've done this, is like a marriage. And a lot of them do it in divorce. Fortunately, this one's been going on for 14 years, and we get along. And we're both married. Wayne's first daughter was born, actually, here's a smart move, and you'll appreciate this. When we did the K2, his daughter was born the same weekend. In terms of introduction at Dayton, Wayne was smart, he stayed home. So he understands about staying married too, and I understand too. So, but we have a lot of fun. Listening to our customers is very important. A lot of these things you see in these radios are because of what we learned talking to you guys. I've got this crazy 6,000 person email discussion list. I'm sure how many folks here have read that or looked at it. I'm actually the moderator for it. That's for two reasons. I'm probably the only person they'll listen to in terms of keeping people under control. I don't want to subject somebody else to have to try to do that. We have a good group on there. It's actually a very polite group overall. And it's more just over enthusiasm about talking about the latest antenna or whatever it is they're talking about, trying to keep that from overwhelming the K3 or K2 questions, and that's always a challenge. But I don't want to be so draconian as they can't talk. But the key thing from that is we get great marketing feedback from you guys, which is wonderful. We don't even tell you when we're writing down what you guys are suggesting. We write a lot of it down. We can't do it all. We never can promise everything, but we do keep track of some of it. This one's really important. And it's dangerous saying that when I'm being videotaped here too, but keep the customer happy no matter what. And those of you who dealt with my support, how many people have dealt with our customer support group here? Has it mostly been positive, I hope? Is it a good thing? Two things. I train really good customer support people. I mentioned they're in sales too. They want to make sure that you guys stay happy. And they're going to work until they solve your problem. As a matter of fact, they'll work until we lose money on it. I really don't care. Because first of all, that happens very rarely. But they will stick with you until they solve your problem. And that's involved in sending people a new product sometimes. Something just got destroyed in shipment, we didn't know what it was, or the customer might even have done it, we couldn't prove that, but we didn't know, so we say, here's another radio, and we'll take it back and fix whatever we have, or do it, if you have to throw it away if it doesn't work when it comes back. But fortunately, that doesn't happen very often, but the bottom line is I tell them, don't let the person go away unhappy. I'm sure there's some people I can't make happy, it always happens, but we minimize that as much as we can by sticking with you. I mean, they will not give up. They keep going and stuff, they keep going. And that's paid off for us time over time. I actually look at my cost of my customer support group, not as a profit center from repairs or anything like that, because I don't know if you realize this, I don't think there's a single ham radio company that makes a profit on their repair group. It's a losing section in terms of you just looked at it, money coming in versus repairs that we charge for it, and so on. It's always, pretty much, we can't charge what it really costs us to do the repairs. You guys wouldn't want to pay it. We charge a reasonable number to sort of try to cover as much as we can. And I look at that plus the customer support guys as a marketing expense. Because that, if we keep you guys happy, you know you're going to get your products fixed at what you think is a fair price to you. And also we're going to solve your problems for you regardless of what it takes. Down the road you're going to come back and buy more from us, or you're going to tell your friends. And that's worked out for us very much so. That's true for a lot of businesses. It's not an unusual thing, but it's something that a lot of companies lose track of. So I want to emphasize that a lot. Move fast. It may not always feel like fast to you guys because you want it faster. Believe me, we are running as fast as you can imagine inside the company when we're doing designs. Because you can't do everything that every person wants. Everybody has their hot interest on the product. But we set out a roadmap, and we are trying to execute as quickly as possible. What you don't see behind the scenes are all the roadblocks that come along the way. You design with one microprocessor, they discontinue it. Believe me, that's happened to me. Parts that don't meet spec. We get the first 100 in, they worked great. The manufacturer falls flat in their face. We have to design in something else and change. This all happens in the background before the product ever gets out the door. It's a continual challenge getting things out. And luckily for us, I haven't had the problem of losing employees in the middle of a design project. Every single one of our design team pretty much has stayed with us. I don't think we've ever lost a design engineer, which has been really, really helpful to us. Obviously, we want to design great products. Hopefully we keep doing